This is Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio, a show that is unapologetically passionate about health and wellness innovation driving access, sustainability, and equity into our healthcare delivery and financing ecosystem. Hosted by digital health advocate, author, and global thought leader Gil Bash, we feature the thought-provoking ideas, people, and companies that are making a difference. I'm Greg Masters, executive producer and co-host of the show, and join Gil as we engage top industry talent who share their transformational insights and best practices. On today's show, our guest is Dr. Junaid Bajwa, Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. A practicing physician in the NHS, the UK's National Health Service, Dr. Bajwa was previously the global lead for strategic alliances and solutions for the Global Digital Center of Excellence at Merck. He co-founded Velocity Health, Europe's first prevention-focused digital health accelerator, in partnership with Telefonica, and led his team to deliver the NHS testbed in partnership with Verily Life Sciences, part of Alphabet, which the Health Service Journal recognized as Best Pharmaceutical Partnership with the NHS in 2018. And with that rather truncated introduction, Gil, over to you.
Greg, once again, great intro. Thank you so very much. And I want to remind our listeners to be sure to tune into Greg Masters and Fred Goldstein's program, Pop Health Week. Population health really is at the core of addressing preventively a lot of the health disparities that we face in this nation. And Greg and Fred have really been tracking the issues for quite some time. Greg, I want to thank you also for your exceptional work at the height of the COVID pandemic. The work you did, I'm positive, has really saved and sustained countless lives. So I salute you as co-host, and I thank you as serving as executive director of the program. And I want to welcome to the show a friend, someone who I admire tremendously, someone I urge everyone to connect with either on LinkedIn or Twitter, Dr. Junaid Bajwa. Dr. Bajwa is with Microsoft. He's if I want to make sure I get this right, he's the Chief Science Research Officer. Is that correct, Junaid?
So the Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research.
Chief Medical Scientist from Microsoft. But he's much more than that. And we're going to explore that during our time together. Junaid and I met some years ago. I was immediately impressed with his humanity, his kindness, and his dedication to patient care. Just a little bit about him. He really begins as a physician for National Health Service, working in a hospital system, of which he nurtured in one of the more challenging areas of the London area. He therefore learned really about the very beginning of health informatics and electronic medical records. He was a pioneer, actually, for that hospital system in organizing them about digital health records. And as a result of that, really was able to reach out to people who needed active medical care. From there, he joined really a world leader in medicine, company Merck, was working out of the UK, and served as the global digital health lead for Merck, and has done some dramatic things there. Obviously, when we look at medicines today, pills and tablets and vaccines and the like, we have to understand that information and digital technology are all part of the package. How we track data, how we collect data, how we look at looking at everything from safety signals, how we look at potential benefits to patients. It's all collected by way of digital technologies, was at the forefront of that. And then after some time with Merck, he joined the Microsoft team, where he has a global role. He's still based in London. Obviously, we know that Microsoft has great headquarters out in the Oregon area. He actually, I imagine, is in this world, he's working in a hybrid situation, telecommute. But Junaid, wherever you are, it's always a thrill for me to be with you. So welcome to the program.
My sincere thanks to you for all of your kind words and for having me on the program today.
Well, kind words that develop. I wanted to, for our listeners, explore a little bit about you. And by the way, just a correction, Microsoft is actually in Washington. And so we want to make sure if you're visiting the Microsoft headquarters, you don't head to the wrong northwestern states. So just a little bit about your background, Junaid. You started as essentially a primary care physician What was the dream way back when? I mean, obviously you're serving in a global role today as primary care physician for one of the world's largest technology companies. What was the dream back then?
It's a fantastic question. And I'd probably go back even further. So at medical school, I always wanted to be a surgeon. And I've been just a very curious individual. So I ended up getting my boards for surgery, my boards for internal medicine, and my boards for primary care. And that's probably a longer story in its own right. But I always enjoyed the interaction with patients, public, and society, and the diagnostic challenge and the communication opportunity that you would have with patients when they come in. And in the UK, in the primary healthcare system, you have 10 minutes with a patient. We would see 42 patients a day, 150 odd patients a week if you're working part time. And within that time, you'd also have 100 to 150 letters to manage, and anywhere between 50 to 100 telephone encounters, and maybe a couple of home visits in between. But as a primary care physician, you're invited into the vulnerability of someone's story, and you can really get a chance to understand them. And it's a real privilege to hear their story and then be able to try and offer them some hope, be that through examination, investigation, and management, or referral into colleagues. And primary care is really the gateway in my mind. And I could use my surgical knowledge or my internal medicine knowledge to try and help patients. But in those 10 minutes, you're managing chaos and managing significant complexity. And I was always curious, A, how to make my life easier and the working life of my colleagues, my nurses, my pharmacists, the administrative team easier. And at the same time, ultimately making benefit to the patients and public that I serve. I continue to practice a day a week within the National Health Service. And I have this amazing privileged role within Microsoft where I see and hear about incredible innovation Monday to Thursday. But there is a delta between the innovations that we hear about and the ability for that innovation to get to patients, public, and society. And I see part of my role as reducing that delta, reducing that time to innovation through, I hope, some of the experiences I've had along the way.
You know, I know everybody's going to be really interested to hear what you're doing at Microsoft, and I want to get to that. But I think the foundation of your story, which is so incredible, really frames your passion for what you're doing at Microsoft today and helping Microsoft really focus on the needs of the health community. So I want to go back. I heard a great story about you. Working in the hospital. You were working in an underserved area of London, and you recognized that there were a lot of charts, a lot of paper, and you had this vision before it was popular, before we were all talking about electronic health records. You recognize that something had to shift. The other aspect is, the UK health system is held up, certainly by people in the United Kingdom, as one of the great public health systems of the world. Obviously, everything needs to be refreshed from time to time, and we're not going to go into that on this program today. Maybe another program we will. I wanted to go back to that early moment where you said, these people are not being well served. We could do so much more for them. And you started to mobilize the system and create, sort of digital footprints for these people's lives. What was going on exactly, and what made you realize this is just not working?
Yeah, maybe a bit of color to this. So when I finished my, I suppose the equivalent would be my residency in primary care, I had two job offers. One was to work for a large multi-site, well-organized organization that ran about 40 different primary care organizations across London, and they were doing brilliant work. And the other one was to work for the worst practice in Southeast London. And this practice, just to put some additional color on it, 5,000 patients, 80% of whom did not speak English as a first language. Most of them spoke Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, Gujarati, situated between two African churches, two mosques, a gurdwara, a synagogue, and a temple. And I had always wanted to do relief work in Southeast Asia. And someone said, do relief work in Southeast London before you think about relief work in Southeast Asia. And probably the best advice that anybody ever gave me. And you kind of go into this thinking that you wish to do good. And you start to realize actually the simple things aren't being done. So they had access to software, but they'd never been trained how to use that software. They had access to the ability to refer electronically, but nobody had ever taught the receptionists or the admin team members how to think about those referrals and those pathways. And I remember being there thinking, oh, how difficult must it be to really transform things? And no one teaches you in medical school how to do transformation. Nobody teaches you how to maybe net the system together to ultimately deliver public good. And as I went on that journey, and I had trained in a practice that was using some form of electronic records, and they were trying to do electronic referrals, I thought I would want to try and replicate that into this practice. But it was the hearts and minds bit to begin with, but also understanding the incentives and disincentives for people to wish to adopt any novel transformation and change. And all I wanted to do at the beginning was really just to get my patients to have an ECG faster at the hospital or get a chest x-ray faster. And I would write an email to the hospital and ask them if I could just have some automatic mail merge templates that would allow me at a click of a button to refer my patients in for chest x-rays or ECGs. And they didn't have that. They didn't have those templates. People were kind of crafting them independently. And so a relatively quick thing was to just try and gather the intelligence that other practices had, pull them together, stick them on a file sharing platform and allow people to share them electronically. And then the productivity gains were huge. But the biggest changes were not the digital changes, actually. The digital was just the enabler. The biggest changes were actually trying to get people to work differently. So getting our receptionists to become smoking cessation advisors, mental health first aiders, making them feel part of the National Health Service. And so that when they were in their temples, gurdwaras, mosques, and churches, they could act as ambassadors of healthcare. And then when those same patients were coming in and waiting in the waiting area, they could have a very different conversation. And actually, the receptionist and the admin team were the access to me and the other physicians in the practice. And that experience was what I was focused on, just to improve the experience of those working in the practice and improving the experience of care. It was enabled by technology, but the technology was just hidden. Unbeknownst to me, people began to recognize some of these efforts, and it led me down a path of ultimately becoming a payer for that locality and taking on responsibilities for integrated care, business intelligence, and IT. I just had to learn what these phrases meant on the job. And then from there, really thinking about actually what is the broader use of technology, be that telemedicine, telehealth, keeping people safe and well at home when they need to be, and how might we unlock the potential of the data that we all talk about for the purposes of public good? And what might be the public value propositions for some of the companies that I was commissioning in order to deliver some of this work?
I'm just amazed at your knowledge of the health ecosystem. And when I speak to CEOs of major companies of our field, and we're in a group setting, sometimes I'm moderating a conversation for them, what I'm amazed is that one doesn't know how the other makes money. They don't know how the other one operates. And I'm wondering if you were given the gift through this early South London experience of journeying through the fragmented health ecosystem. And I wanted to get your perspective on that, because I think that it's not that we lack passionate health professionals or we lack good medicines. I sometimes think we lack collaboration. And so it's not the technology that's holding us back or the desire to heal that's holding us back. It's the culture of the health system that for some reason is holding us back. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think the technology actually, if used right, can empower the individual to achieve more. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the fragmentation of the healthcare system isn't something you learn about at medical school, isn't necessarily something that you learn about in residency. It becomes part of this management culture that people go through. And then if you become a manager in healthcare, you're almost like you've joined the dark side. And what we don't do is try and understand actually what is the best thing that we need to do for the patients and public that we collectively serve. And if your mission is to be a servant leader and ultimately you're there to deliver value to the patients and public you serve, you'll begin to untie the fragmentation because you're all on a common mission. And it's that common mission, I think, that we lose sight of. I mean, we saw even during the pandemic that it suddenly removed barriers to innovation, it removed bureaucracy, and things that we thought would never happen in healthcare began to happen, like video consultations were never supposed to happen. And it took a pandemic, even though they'd been around for 10 years. So a common mission and alignment around common goals unlocks the possibility of innovation. But you're spot on, in my opinion, around some of the cultural imbalances and the hierarchies that you have within any given healthcare system, and the perverse and positive incentives that you could do to enable change.
And if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Health Unabashed on Healthcare Now Radio. Our guest is physician, scientist, and clinical informaticist Dr. Junaid Bajwa, Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. We're discussing his journey from primary care physician to clinical informatics architect and the role technology can play enabling a sustainable, accessible, and equitable healthcare economy.
I'm reflecting on an experience that you and I shared maybe, I think, 2-3 years ago. You were kind enough to arrange for us to do a premiere screening of General Magic. An amazing documentary, of course, about a company that few people remember. And, it's the genesis of, I'll hold it up because we're on screen. I don't know if you know what this is, of course. I'm holding to our listeners, I'm holding up the Apple Newton. And General Magic was the predecessor to the Apple Newton. And I reflect on innovation. And I recently asked a group of seasoned medical professionals like yourself, that group, how much training do you get on technology and during medical school? They pretty much universally answered, maybe we have a lecture or two or three, but that's about it. We hear about electronic medical records. We hear about virtual reality or artificial or augmented reality, augmented intelligence, but we actually don't get any exposure. There is no set professor of medicine, of health innovation technology. And so I want to go back and combine the Junaid of then, the Junaid of now. I mean, obviously, you're in the role you have, you're one of the world's leading lights in terms of how technology can advance patient care, how it can amplify the power of the health professional. What sparked you as a health professional, finishing your residency, to sort of dive into technology and innovation?
So first of all, I wouldn't say that I'm a leading light, but I'm certainly surrounded by a number of leading lights that enable me to perhaps shine in a slightly different direction. But I do ultimately believe that we rise by lifting others, and it's the work that delivers the impact. And coming back to then your question, I think for me, I had no option. I couldn't get any worse in terms of performance at this practice. My patients deserved better, and they just needed a different approach to things. Some of those approaches I could steal with pride from things that I had learned during the vocation of my training, and other things just needed to be done differently. And it was just about having a super open mind, thinking about what we could do locally that made sense, and then creating a team that was able to do some incremental things, because we weren't ready for massive transformational changes. But we were ready for incremental change. And I think understanding the context of your work and understanding the readiness of those around you to adopt change is really, really important. So it's not just enough to have a clever idea. General Magic did have no shortage of clever ideas, but they had a product market fit and a time challenge. So the world wasn't ready, I think in 1993, if I'm not mistaken, with General Magic, for a cloud-based internet solution that had touch screen, had emojis, and had a range of other innovation at a price point that was unaffordable for most of the public. But it took every generation of the iPod to come, and it took the evolution of iTunes to come, and for society to be ready to adopt that innovation, to ultimately for us to have the iPhone or the smartphones of today, and indeed broader innovation that has followed since. So product market fit, finding the right time, understanding the context of your work, I think is super important. But I've made a bunch of mistakes along the way, and I'm not afraid to admit them. But those mistakes have been the things that I could learn from to then adapt and apply to the next problem I'd like to go and solve.
I think of Peter Sang in the Learning Organization, a great book I highly recommend to people. No, the General Magic example that we were riffing about just now, you mentioned from that came the iPod, came eBay, came PayPal, obviously the evolution of the smartphone at the earliest stages. Those people who were they were all part of that venture. Young people part of a venture that failed, but they took away something that they applied. And Microsoft is such a learning organization. I'm constantly impressed. As some of your colleagues know, there's not a commercial, folks, but I'm the owner of multiple Microsoft Surfaces, and I love them. Obviously I have other products, but when the Surface came out, I got it and fell in love with it. But I wanted to explore with you. You're bringing so much knowledge. You've been inside one of the world's largest biopharmaceutical companies. You're inside one of the world's leading national health services, and now you come to Microsoft, and you're a physician, you're a scientist, you're a researcher, you're a world-class physician, you're compassionate, you appreciate technology. Share with us, what's the day in the life of a physician at Microsoft?
So the team I have the privilege of being part of is known as Health Futures, and it's an extraordinary team, an eclectic team, and a team of blends. So I get a chance to work with some of the most brilliant minds across the computer science space, some of the most brilliant minds who think about human computer interfaces, designers, ethnographers, who are challenging themselves to really understand that type of research that can have incredible impact for society and the world around us. And so the exam question that we focus on is around how might we transform the practice of medicine with trusted, reliable, responsible, human-centered AI? And each of that, I think, is a sub-question in its own right. So it's not just about AI for the sake of AI. We need to understand and ensure that this AI is trusted and it's been built in a responsible, trustworthy manner, that it's reliable and it's human-centered. So we have a human in the loop within many of the things that we're inventing or innovating against. And we understand that it's that multidisciplinary blend of people that can approach challenges together that ultimately can have not just incredible research papers, but ultimately deliver real world impact at the same time. And so some of our innovations are in stealth, so I wouldn't be able to talk about them. Others are in the public domain. And I think we're in a moment in time where we see the confluence of biology, medicine, and technology coming together to truly reimagine and exercise our imagination of what medicine for the future could be. And we talk about this notion of precision medicine and precision healthcare. I think of precision medicine and healthcare, and this is just kind of my opinion on this, is medicine is a practice. It's not a thing. But my practice will change if I had different tools. My practice will change if I had access to precision diagnostics. My practice will change if I had access to precision therapeutics. And my practice will change if I could capture data in an ambient connected care manner. And if I had connected care, ambient care, precision diagnostics, and precision therapeutics at my disposal, it would change my practice and enable me to offer even more precise care to the patients and public that I serve. And a lot of the work that we're doing is thinking about how might AI supercharge some of these opportunities around us, exercise our imagination around what the future of healthcare could be.
Well, it's fascinating you're talking about that. As you know, I had the privilege, thanks to Microsoft, to participate in a video conversation with one of the leading lights in AI, who's also very connected to Microsoft, Tom Lowry, and we talked specifically about AI. I'm always amazed at how medicine is a culture, and how often culture crushes innovation. It's so powerful it can crush change. And the thought of augmented intelligence to me is nothing more than grand rounds sort of made en masse. It's sort of like collecting all the grand rounds of a topic together at one given moment to give you insight. And just as physicians have always been trained when you were a resident, going from patient to patient with a senior colleague, maybe a chief resident or a leading light of the department you were in, and talking about a patient case, you learned collectively. I think of my father-in-law, really a great recognized physician who had almost total recall memory to the moment he left this world. I mean, his knowledge was just unbelievable. He was like a walking computer. Those are few and far between. I mean, you could speak to him about a case he had seen 40 years previously, and he would be able to recite the whole case. But a physician today, there's so much going on in terms of medicine and technology. I don't see how a physician could even keep up with what's happening in 2 months from now. And I would say that augmented intelligence is almost a lifesaver. But I wanted to ask you a basic question. I don't think the challenge is with technology or innovation. I think medicine has always been a changing profession, constantly. New science, new ideas, new medicines, new approaches, new investigational treatments. You're at the forefront of an organization that is driving change. It's not just doing things and inventing things. No, it's making things happen that require us as humans to adapt. Is that something that's on the table when you're in these virtual meetings at Microsoft? You're saying, hey, if we do this, it's going to result in change, and change is disruptive in medicine. How do we make it less disruptive? Is that something that you talk about?
Yeah, so we are a partner-driven organization, and we work with our partners to challenge us on some of these things. So you need access to data, you need domain expertise, and you need compute power in order to have AI. And that domain expertise with individuals that not only want to innovate around the margins, but then implement that innovation into their practice. We really pressure test. So that human-centered approach, or that human computer interface, which is new knowledge for me that I did not have before I joined Microsoft, but there's a real discipline around it, is something that we have a bench strength with. And to your earlier point, I mean, there is data that suggests that there's an article published on PubMed every 30 seconds. There's something like 4,000 new papers every day, and medical knowledge is doubling every 73 days. And how can anyone keep up with that level of innovation and transformation? We saw the pandemic. We got out of the pandemic because of the science. And it was almost, you could see what was happening across the world as COVID spread across the world, knowledge was being shared, and the level of innovation that was happening, be that the ventilation piece, let alone what we were seeing happening on vaccines, and then the real world data that's being collected on vaccines and it continues to be such that we understand these mechanisms in more detail, means that you have that collective community of physicians and healthcare professionals and managers working together, leveraging best practice. And what medicine requires is an evidence base, and we'll collectively build that evidence base over time. But medics and healthcare professionals like to have tools in their hands that they can apply and deploy. So it's not good enough for us just to have a paper, but what we wish to have is that paper that translates into real world impact.
It's hard to believe that we've zoomed through our time together today. My suggestion to our listeners is, one, if you're on your way to visit Junaid when he's in the United States, don't go to Oregon, go to Redmond, Washington. Make sure you do that, please. Save your gas. That's one. And two, follow Junaid. He's on Twitter. He's on LinkedIn. He is someone really worth your attention. Junaid, as always, every moment I spend with you is illuminating. Thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you and your colleagues at Microsoft for making it happen.
And that's a wrap for today's broadcast. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in and our special guest, Dr. Junaid Bajwa, Chief Medical Scientist at Microsoft Research. Follow his work on Twitter via @DRJBAJWA, Dr. J. Bajwa, and on LinkedIn via www.linkedin.com/IN/Junaid Bajwa. And that's JUNAIDBAJWA. Learn more about Health Unabashed on the program page at Healthcare Now Radio. We air weekdays at 10:30 a.m., 6:30 p.m., and 2:30 a.m. Eastern, or 7:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m., and 11:30 p.m. Pacific. Do keep the conversation going with Gil and me on Twitter by connecting with us via @Gil_Bash, and that's BASHE, and Greg Masters, MPH, and that's Greg with 2 G's, and do remember to tag your tweets with Health Unabashed. Until next time, stay unapologetically passionate about improving health.